Hey y'all, from the West Tennessee Delta Heritage Center and Tina Turner Museum. Where else can you find 5 museums collectively telling you all about the Tennessee Delta, especially music? Did you know Tina Turner is from here? We've got her one-room schoolhouse and it's filled with her costumes. Bluesman Sleepy John Estes' home is here too. An authentic Southern experience just waiting for you right off of I-40 at exit 56 in Brownsville, Tennessee. We can't wait to see you soon.
Welcome to this session of the Festival of Books. I'm Daniel Pigg, your host for this session on Poetry Today. On behalf of Humanities Tennessee, I would like to welcome you to this session featuring poets Destiny O. Birdsong and Nate Marshall. If you're watching on Facebook Live or YouTube and want to ask questions during the session, you'll need to download the festival app or visit the streaming site via the link at www.humtn.org/SFB. Parnassus Books is our bookseller, and your purchases of books through Parnassus help us to keep the festival free. Humanities staff will place the book buy link at the top of the chat. The Southern Festival of Books is a free, nonprofit event that is supported in part by donations from individuals. If you appreciate the event and would like to support us in our efforts, please visit the website for Humanities Tennessee. Let me tell you briefly about our authors, then they will read briefly from their new books. Then I'll start our discussion and then take your questions for them. Destiny Birdsong is a Louisiana-based poet, fiction writer, and essayist. She has received fellowships from Cave Cayman, Hallelujah, Jack Jones Literary Arts, the Ragsdale Foundation, and MacDowell Colony, and won the Academy of American Poets Prize, Naugatuck River Review 2006's Narrative Poetry Contest, and Meridian's 2007 Borders Contest in Poetry. She earned both her MFA and PhD from Vanderbilt University and now lives in Nashville. Negotiation is about what it means to live in this America, about Cardi B and top-tier journal publications, about autoimmune disease and the speaker's intense hunger for her own body, a surprise of self-love in the aftermath of both assault and diagnosis. It's a series of love letters to Black women who are often singled out for abuse and assault, silencing and tokenism, fetishization, and cultural appropriation in ways that throw the rock, then hide the hand. Nate Marshall is an award-winning author, editor, poet, playwright, performer, educator, speaker, and rapper. His book, Wild Hundreds, was honored with the Black Caucus of American Library Association Award for Poetry Book of the Year and the Great Lakes College Association's New Writer Award. He is also an editor of the Breakbeats Poet, New American Poetry in the Age of Hip Hop, and he also co-curates the Breakbeats Poet series for Haymarket Books. Marshall co-wrote the play No Blue Memories, The Life of Gwendolyn Brooks. His last rap album, Grown, came out in 2005 with his group, Daily Lyrical Product. The poems in Finna consider the brevity and disposability of Black lives and other oppressed peoples in our current era of embodied white supremacy, and the use of Black vernacular in America's vast reserve of racial and gender epithets. Finna explores the erasure of peoples in the American narrative, asks how gendered language can provoke violence, and finally, how the Black vernacular expands our notion of possibility, giving us a new language of hope. And I believe we had a coin toss, and that uh, Nate agreed to go first.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's very cool to be here, albeit digitally. The last time I got a chance to be at the Southern Festival of Books was really special for me because I got to connect with like a long lost cousin of mine who had written a book. So that was sort of a cool moment. But yeah, I'll start with this poem. This is called On. The highest promise we could offer was one to a land or man or idea greater than we. Someone would exclaim, on folk I made that shot, or on chief I got her number, or on boss I didn't see anything that night. When we put covenants on everything we loved, this suggested seriousness. We were not allowed to love in any fickle way. In the revisionist history of my hood genesis, I would be more honest than honest. Put things on my Huffy bike, on my report card, on my citizenship award, on my mama's golden NA necklace, on my grandma's favorite chair, on my father's attention and the warm air he left each time he fled. After Pierre got shot and his bullet gifter walked the same blocks as the rest of us in uneasy Omerta, I didn't think he died. How could he, when his name became a vow for us all? Each street dispute punctuated with on P to prove us tellers of truths. When Bird got jumped, his spinal column crushed, I assume he made his street name true. A different kind of flight. Everything sacred between ragtown boys, now enveloped in the parchment of On Bird and carried away. Cool. Yeah, I'll read this one. So I'm trying to think, is there anything I need to say? So this poem I wrote after listening to an interview with the grandmother of Tamir Rice. For those of y'all who don't remember, Tamir Rice was a young man. I believe he was 12 at the time. He was murdered by the police in Cleveland, ostensibly for having a toy gun, not aiming at it, just having it. And so, in this interview, his grandmother said this thing that struck me, which was that he wasn't allowed to play with toy guns. And that was like also a rule in my house, instituted by my grandmother. And it makes me think about the way that, I think people of different races have different relationships to these questions, right? To even to toys, right? For for good reason often. So this is called Conceal. Grandma, who kept books for a living and read corner store romance novels. Grandma, who kept dictionaries on the kitchen table and slurred words into contraction. Grandma, who taught me how to pass a poll test and how to beat a draft exam. Grandma, who told me to study hard and leave school if the MBA was an option. Grandma, who bought black and called us her little niggas with a smirk. Grandma, who taught me how to shoot a bank shot and told me to quit the team if I rode bench. Grandma, who paid for cars in cash and gambled herself broke on weekends. Grandma, who hid toy guns I got as gifts, and when she passed, I pulled a real shotgun from the wall of her closet. Cool. Oh man. All right, yeah. I'll all right. So I'll read this poem. This opens the book actually. Um yeah, and it kind of comes from the, I'm living in Colorado now. I'm teaching at Colorado College, and being out in the West has been sort of instructional. One of the things that I think has really struck me is the more pronounced kind of indigenous presence than I think, of the Midwest and the South, where I've spent most of my life. And so, this poem is thinking about, in here, there's like a fairly common practice of like doing a land acknowledgement. So acknowledging the people who were the original custodians of the land. In the case where I'm at now, that would be like the Ute and the Arapaho, among others. And so this is, I guess, my sort of version of a land acknowledgement. This is called landless acknowledgement. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that we live on some unceded bones. Sometimes me and mine imagine ancestral homes. All I got so far is Montgomery, Alabama. Maybe a boat, maybe a plot of land somewhere so far from the South Sides I've claimed that I would get lost on the way. I admit, sometimes my homies talk about their families immigrating and I get jealous. We lost the land we were custodians over before I was a twinkle in the eye of a twinkle in the eye of a twinkle in the eye. Closest I got to a homeland is my mama's Caucasian pitch on the phone calling the police. Closest I got to a homeland is not never calling the police. Closest I got to a homeland is my daddy's laugh in a spades game. Closest I got to a homeland is my lover's tongue talking or otherwise. Closest I got to a homeland is the funk under a DJ's needle and my handful of a dance partner. Not to be dark, but I am. Not to be dark, but the planet is on fire. Not to be dark, but they move in capitals because the water is coming up. Not to be dark, but our bones are in that water too. Maybe that's my capital. Once the polar capitals melt and there's a whole lot less land for folks to buy and sell and steal, maybe everybody will feel a little more dark, will feel a little more homelandless like we do. Why you think I call my compatriots homies? Maybe ain't no home, except for how your beloveds cuss or pray or pronounce. Cool. You know what? I'll end with this. So I went to Vanderbilt, right, down in Nashville, and I recently wrote a poem, I guess sort of for one of my mentors when I was there, but thinking about about Vanderbilt's sort of interesting history in poetry specifically, right? So thinking about the fugitive poets, the agrarians, and how so much of that movement that did become quite, I guess, important in American letters was also like sort of racism and anti-Black racism was really central to that project. And so how kind of funny it is that a place like that would then, be a kind of intellectual home for me and for folks like Destiny and for so many others. So this is called Unholy Sonnet from Mark Jarman. In college, where I started my descent amongst the dappled grass and twirling leaves, down south where fall is long and filled with trees of every sort that take on every tint. The city's western border where I spent long days reading the Western canon's creeds, wrote ballads, sonnets with a separate seed. The fugitives, they surely never meant a fugitive like me to be their heir, an interloper in their southern song. For shame, the classroom let the shadow speak. The spook sat by and scribbled out his prayers to liquor stores and sinners with their wrongs. What I inherited, damn sure ain't me. Cool. Thank y'all so much.
You. And now, Destiny.
Hello, so good to be here. Thank you, Daniel, for moderating this conversation. Thank you, Nate, for reading with me. Thanks to the Southern Festival of Books for inviting me. And thank you to the audience for tuning in and listening. I'm just going to read some poems from different sections of my book, Negotiations, which will be out in 3 days from Tin House. And the first poem I'm going to read is the title poem, Negotiations. My pussy is not made of microfiber. I can't put it on my head to conduct business or plan insurrections. It's not big enough to hide in, dear reader, and it's not bulletproof. It can't be offered to neo-Nazis as a lure for conversion therapy. That didn't work for Sally Hemings, and I know it can't work for me. But I could drive to Charlottesville tonight and sweep blood from its holy soil, like Sally's skirts dragging the late summer's scorched leaves across the cobble. Every day, a woman's ghost catches on something. Sally's last decade was spent with her children, free, but always under the threat of her high color, the familial ties revving beneath her skin like V8 engines. This is why the location of my anxiety can't be triangulated with hashtags. The man who ran me off the road while shouting nigger is somewhere in the trees. And Black folks are always dying in the trees. These are 2 of 4,000 recorded reasons I have trouble driving past trees. The history of my slavery is a history of fabrics. Osnaburg, wool, denim, linsey, linen, a few skeins of thread and a handful of blunted needles, later sandwich boards, glitter paint, a bit of chain draped fashionably across the shoulders. But not even Sally's Calamanco frocks could have been held together with safety pins. Someone's puncture-resistant tongue was already under the collar, flicking at the whalebone bodice. And it never mattered if she didn't want to be touched by a nation's needs. The pickets blister my hands. The crowd pulses toward me like auction day, salivating as my unwhite body takes a stage. In the newsfeed, pink foam and cat ears win the day. My rage is a ball gag. My rage is sedated by the pre-filled syringe of history. Most of my illnesses are invisible and not covered by Medicaid. I am here because I haven't decided how I want to die. And you keep inviting me to happy hour to pick my brain. The marches are more elaborate. The plans become more brazen. We should read up on neurotoxins. And it's almost aphrodisiacal. If you rub against any idea long enough while wearing a vaginal suit, it might come to look 3/5 feasible. But the master's tools are never kind to the hand rocking the cradle. There are no portraits of Sally and no diaries, so I have to imagine the prick of her tongue when the forefather asks, smirking, if the tea has been poisoned. When she replies that she is only there to free her children. When she tells him she never came there to play with him. And this next poem is called Ode to My Body, and it's after Lucille Clifton. You were born in the year of the rooster and the dismembered grandmother. Your mama's first Christmas alone, trying to guess how much sugar to put in the pies and how much can kill. You were bundled into the house with the 2 uncles sharing one of the bedrooms and 0 baths, a summer cabin in another life. I have treated you like anything I never earned, Every light blazing, fridge wide open, cooling the whole neighborhood, doors unlocked. I don't know how you survived the years without sunscreen or health insurance. Crabs from the first time I dropped nameless as apple seeds into the toilet. The Everclear, the laxatives, the Black and Milds. You should have happened to a more careful woman. Never known anxiety or shame. The 13-hour drive through Arkansas, panic silent as the sleet stickying the windshield. The lectures I taught, with the gallon of prep scouring your insides. The distance to the bathroom tucked behind one ear, my pride intent on beating your best time. If you could speak in languages other than mucus and loose stools, I would apologize for this and in a voice not unlike my own. Remind us what we are to each other. Echo, Narcissus, both drunk on their own guile, both murderous in their insistence of love. You should know I never looked at you and blamed your mother. Though it is true, I have wished you smaller, with more symmetry, like the stone of a fruit nestled in the slick flesh of the world. In so many ways, I have tried to discard you, or I have cut you in two with water fasts, nicotine, stretched you to feed the men what they wanted, the women what they could love. And when you failed, and I have called you failure, whom could I blame? What wonder is it that your newest threat is your own patrol of cells, a house as divided as the country intent on stealing your coverage? It's all right that this is the most epic thing about you. And all right that, like your ancestors, you might leave with fewer parts than those with which you came. I would promise you good years between now and then, but who would I be fooling? Even now, I'm slipping you milk and slabs of bread smeared with butter. Like all your lovers, I know how much you can take, and I have come to love not you, but your refusal to be consumed. I push you up pill bottles and downstairs, and every morning you wrap a thin new layer of membrane around the sack that holds my heart. You dispatch a brigade of cells with their sealed warrants to a host of organs I hope I never see. This third poem is called Fable. When T decides he'll put on the grizzly bear suit, already limp with someone else's sweat, and chase the girls around the fairgrounds, he's not quite sure what possessed him or what will. It just seemed like something to do on an afternoon already so hot, the quilted and dark interior felt like a cooling. And what he also found was a muffling. The shrieks of children and the gurgle of deep fryers scalding the air were now garbled as he pranced his claw-heavy feet on the patty-caked dirt. In the hollowed-out cadaver of fur, T became hollow and soon rode over the bodies of anyone who wouldn't get out of his way. First, it was children, stumbling, dazzled by the melting glitter of red snow cones, the golden crackle of funnel cakes dissolving in their mouths. Then it was their mothers, indignant at the anthropomorphized beast who danced a jig as they scrambled to scoop every pampered bottom from the ground. The better salted tongues threw curses after his wide-legged jaunt toward the Ferris wheel and the spinning teacups tilting on steel saucers. But soon it was teenaged girls, aloof, absorbed by nail polish, lip balm, and boys who were equally oblivious to paws upraised, closing in. T ran the girls because girls are good for running. Some were even track stars at the local high school. The others he gave a head start, then followed in quick pursuit, the suit filling with his breath and aspiration, which made the space neither colder nor hotter. Somehow, he jostled the head just so, and could see the full slant of falling bodies slick with flavored oils and pubescent musk. And just as he did with the babies, he never stopped. There was no need when, as he topped one crumpling body, another girl careened backward in her tall sneakers a few feet ahead. It was the feel of their torsos knocking against him, how their spindly limbs would tangle briefly with his calcified claws, which were blunt and far better at bruising than cutting, and better still at dragging things a few feet before they fell. One girl lost a strappy gold sandal. The plastic popped loose from the sole as she bumped along on her thighs, far enough to collide into another, whose Mary Jane slid free from her heel and clocked another full in the face, her earrings flying like horseshoes tossed by the indifferent boys in a tent near the rodeo and landing as if intended onto two foreclaws skimming the air above her head. Yet another, having already run herself out of a sensible pair of Oxfords, had a cashmere sock shredded by stiletto nails, and another lost a proper bowl of blueberry cotton candy, so trampled into the dust it looked as if a corner of sky had fallen. T made no apologies, only marveled at the thump of bodies and scatter of charms that moments before were worn either dearly or nonchalantly, as one does when one is not aware of how much can be lost to a whimsical cruel. None were thinking of this. Perhaps not even T, who, had he been accosted, might have been hard pressed in the moment to explain where the costume even came from. No one knew that beneath flailed a frail boy who turned pages for the church organist, pushed lawnmowers with his small shoulders in summer's dusk. He was practical as himself and would grow into a man with his own petty grievances, stiffening limbs, and a hopelessness that comes with watching oneself become a being altogether foreign, old age biting through his good bones like a beast through birch. The thought alone is enough to make anyone a monster. But bears are not monsters, so we don't know what T has become as he savors the girl's wails while loping toward trailers lined like dominoes around the carnival. With the zipper flashing on his back like a blade no one had the gumption to catch between two fingers and pull, T watched the houses that had wheeled themselves into place, void of foundations and, at the moment, people who would protect them. T thought, perfect. I can knock these down too if I want. His instincts were that simple now, and after the girls, that keen. My last poem is the last poem in the book, and it is called And Though the Odds Say Improbable. The black ladies in their printed dresses float into the deli, tip-tipping across the coat of grease on the floor. It's still warm in October, so they remove their sunglasses, rub their oiled shoulders, remark, "Ooh, so cold in here." One watches purses while others shimmy to the salad bar. Some are nurses here for conferences, some on lunch breaks from government jobs downtown, some are flakes, unemployed, divas, deans, retired, do hair, edges slick, wand curls crisp in the freoned air. They pinch the fainted lettuce onto plates, they scoop the pitted olives, cherries, dates into bowls. The cotton blended florals, plaids, prisms, paisleys, polkas flutter on calves until they reach their seats. They kiss mustard, avocado, banana pudding, or really just custard with mashed up banana, from three-ringed fingers. One sways to the soft serve machine and lingers a little too long, but returns with a smile, a swirl cone, done up soda counter style. Every one of them been through something: sit-ins, bombings, busing, the crack epidemic, Reaganomics, backdoor abortions, miscarriages, picket signs in front of the free clinic, and now the white girl with the blunt bob snatching plates too early. They tap her wrist, give each other the look, say, "It's all right, miss. Don't worry about us." My heart liked to stop, When the black ladies nodded their heads and hoops, clip-ons, drop pearls, chandeliers, gold nickel earrings twirled above beautiful elbows. Not a care in this old world. Republic then crumpled. Black Wall Street crashed about a century ago. They leave together. Their laughter is brash and openly secretive. You bet not ask. Perfume wafts. They wave, say, all right, girl, I'll be seeing you. One coughs, and I pray it's just the cold air, the pollen, the pepper, a little piece of meat stuck in her throat. The black ladies better have a blessed day, month, year, life. I mean it the opposite way they mean it whenever they have to say it to coworkers, husbands, customers, the demon board. Oop, child, I meant deacon. As I leave, I touch the table where they sat. They're not superhuman. They ain't always able to save the children, the men, the country, or even your silk presses, but whatever they touch, somebody's good God blesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I thought we might begin with a question that people probably ask any writer. That is, what inspired you to become a poet?
I'll go first. Sometimes I ask myself that question, like, why poetry and why writing? Because it's a solitary endeavor. Sometimes the risks, sometimes, not always, sometimes the risks outweigh the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I think that that's just my lane. There are things that I do well, and that's one of them. I'm not a great cook. I'm not like really skilled at, debates or anything like that. But if you get me in front of a page, I can be sad, I can be sick, I can be pissed off, I can be scared. And if you get me in front of a page, I will make something. And that's why I come back to it. I can't necessarily tell you why I started, but that's what keeps me here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think similarly, I feel similarly. I guess one thing for me that was sort of, so I started writing kind of right as I was like coming into my adolescence. And I think it was absolutely a space for me where I felt like I could process things that otherwise were like difficult to process, either because I didn't necessarily feel like I had folks to talk to them about, or or whatever, right? Or just even like having the poem as a kind of artifact was always helpful in creating conversation with people, right? Yeah, but I think one of the things that I remember as a kid seeing the TV show Deaf Poetry, and there was and Amir Baraka was on this episode. It was the first episode I ever saw. He like ended the episode, and I'm trying to think, and he did this poem called "Why As We Americans," and I just remember like seeing that and being, oh, I didn't know that poetry could sort of do this, right? I didn't, my impression of poetry was very much shaped by like school and these sort of, staid, kind of pastoral things. And I was like, oh, but this thing seems to be like moving in the world and aware of the world in a different way. And I wasn't, and like knowing that poems could do that opened something up for me, and it made me like want to explore the form myself.
I have one more question for you both, and then we'll turn to a couple of questions from the audience.
Sure.
Well, writers are always readers. So, who were the most important influences on your poetry? As I read both of your books of poetry, I found Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays, Achibe's Things Fall Apart, Jamila Woods, Jupiter Hammond, Prince's Purple Rain, Francine Harris, and a host of others.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I guess for me, so on my office door at the college, I have 4 writers sort of on the wall, And so I'll just name those four. It's Martina Spada, Phyllis Wheatley, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Black Thought from the band The Roots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Gosh, everything. If I had to sort of like narrow it to poetry, I would say Lucille Clifton, Natasha Trethway. Everyone in the notes section of my book, they had some influence on me. But I was thinking the other day, and I asked myself, if there was one book in American literature that you felt like your book was in conversation with, what book would it be? And for me, that book is Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs.
Yes.
I was incredibly young when I read that book, and I did not, it contains everything. I feel like that's where my American literature began, with that book. And I think that's a fair argument. I think Phyllis Wheatley is important. I think Lucy Terry is important. I think Equiano is important. But when I think of like where the conversations that I'm having started, it started with that book, because everything is in that book, right? Misogynoir, the economics that control Black women's bodies, sexual violence, the economic impact of bondage. At the end of the book, she says, "This is not a happy ending. I still don't have a home for my children." And I think like all of the things that are in negotiations are talking back to that book. And so it's not poetry, but I think that in my life as a poet, I don't necessarily limit influence to just poets and other poets and poems. It's everywhere. But that book particularly for me is one that I return to often when I am thinking about America right now, because some things have changed, but a lot of stuff is still the same. I'm having the same conversations that she was having 160 years ago.
Indeed you are. Your book. Okay, here are a couple of questions from our viewers. You both went to Vanderbilt, and Nate mentions the agrarians. What was that experience like for both of you?
It's funny because as Nate was talking about Vanderbilt, I had these distinct memories of walking across campus and thinking like, oh man, Alan Tate would be rolling over in his grave right now, and that brought me so much joy. Like it made me lift my head a little higher, because I was like, yeah, I'm here in spite of. I think that is what that experience often felt like for me. The people who I most identified with on campus were the people who worked on the grounds, who were part of the staff. Like those, like I would look at those people and see like the people that I loved, like people in my family, my aunts, my mom, my grandmother, people who worked in those positions for very little pay. And with daily microaggressions. And so it always felt a little strange for me. I think it was a great place. I learned a lot of things. I got a lot of degrees. Like, I appreciate that. But it always felt a little bit uncomfortable, because we were walking on, we were literally walking on both hallowed and haunted ground. And that always felt like that was happening at Vanderbilt. But to be honest, that happens in a lot of places, I think that while it is true that Vanderbilt as an institution has sometimes had a contentious relationship with people of color, there are a lot of institutions in this country that have had those relationships. I appreciate that things had changed enough for me to get in and to get a good education, but the reality of its history was never lost on me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel sort of similarly, right? I think, a thing that for me was the kind of tension point when I was going to Vandy initially was, I'm from Chicago, was sort of born and raised there. And so I was really the first person in my family to go back south for school and not go to an HBCU. And I think there was a lot of like really understandable anxiety in that. Like there's even and you know, I didn't realize this when my mom was like sort of uncomfortable with the idea of me going to Vanderbilt initially, but when she was a young person, she was gonna go to University of Alabama. So you know, her mom was from Montgomery. They drove down to Tuscaloosa from Chicago with all their stuff, and there was just like weirdness. They were like, "Oh, we don't have, you know, what?" And this is like maybe the late '70s, early '80s, and my grandma was like, "Forget this," because she had gone to Alabama State and a bunch of her family did. So she just like picked up. She was like, "Whatever," drove down to Montgomery, and they were like, "Cool, yeah, we got her easy," right? And so I think, you know, me and my mom haven't really had that conversation, but I wonder if like her sort of hesitancy around my matriculation was about that kind of like, you know, that sort of carryover trauma and that in a ways that she wouldn't have even connected. But yeah, I mean, certainly I think, you know, I was able to have a good education in that space. I'm grateful for that. And there were also ways it was like profoundly uncomfortable and you know, and I think I got a lot of like solace and a lot of strength from being able to like go to church in like South Nashville or going over to like Fisk and TSU and hanging out with folks over there, or just like, you know, building community with other like Black students on campus that in some ways like I think allowed me to have a kind of productive insulation where I could like do my intellectual work, but also not feel you know, destroyed or too aggrieved by some of the ways in which, you know, that work would sort of challenge my personhood.
We're approaching the end of our session. We do have another question. COVID-19 reigns right now. So the question that someone has asked is, how has writing during the pandemic worked for you? How has it inspired or hampered or had an impact?
Yeah, you know, I haven't written very much, but I don't know if that is, but I should say like for me, that's a thing that's common after I come out of a project, because it's just like a little bit of like, it's like refractory, like you got to sort of rest and recharge and like read and experience and just do other stuff. So it's hard for me to say how much of that is because of the pandemic and how much of that is just, you know, a natural part of my own process of like withdrawal for a bit.
So I have not been writing a lot of poetry, but I have been writing a lot of prose. Written a couple of essays. I just sold a second book, which is fiction, and so I've been thank you. And I've been working on edits for that book. I think that, you know, like I said this to an interviewer a couple of weeks ago, but I think that for me, writing is a kind of world building. It's a very intimate world building, and it is not the same world building that happens when I am around people and like in like, you know, face-to-face relationships with people. But I think that it has served as like a good stand-in for that. It kind of keeps me from being lonely. There is a, you know, universe that I've sort of built in my head for this particular project, and it's nice to get in there and it's nice to imagine things. So, and I don't know that the pandemic, you know, I don't know, like I'm single, I live alone. Like, I mean, really ain't nothing changed but mask wearing outside and letting people come over to my house. So I can't necessarily say that the pandemic has been, has had a positive or negative impact on that, because, you know, I have a job to do as a writer. And so every day I wake up and I try to get that job done. And that for me, at least for the past like 6 or 7 years, has never happened under ideal conditions. And this is just another less than ideal condition.
Well, thank both of you. Negotiations and Finna, both available from Parnassus Books. The link is in the chat for that. We'd like to thank Humanities Tennessee and our many sponsors. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Maybe we'll be back on ground in Nashville next year. Thanks again, and thanks to our writers.